We are joined with the man himself, Jim Jatras. How you doing, Jim? You doing okay today?
A little older, a little grayer every day.
You see my grade myself, right? Jim
You got,
Jatras.
you got some catching up to do.
True, true. Jim Jatras, he's a former U.S. diplomat, policy advisor, and analyst for Republican leadership in the United States Senate. Jim, I'm so glad that you could join me today, man. Thank you for this.
Glad to be here.
Trump has, I was showing the audience this, what I call a referendum scheme that Zelensky has come out with. Donald Trump, in a political interview, effectively said, hey, man, it's time to have elections. And so Zelensky goes meet with his European backers or helpers, and he comes out with effectively, well, maybe we can have a referendum. Like, this seems to just be a way to try to game Trump on this. Give me your thoughts on all of this. In fact, you can even go to the 28-point peace plan, because I don't think I've had you on before the plan came out. But effectively, everything surrounding what is culminated into Zelensky coming out saying, okay, maybe we can have a referendum at this point.
Sure. I mean, Jamal, how many times do we have to see this movie? I mean, Trump comes out with something. He talks to the Russians. The Russians say, well, we can talk about part of it, and part of it's not acceptable. And Trump says, oh, the Russians love it, which they don't. And then he comes back and he talks to the Ukrainians and the Europeans, and they don't like it at all. But they say, well, here's our counter proposal, which essentially walks it back from whatever small possibility the Russians could even entertain it. And then they dance around saying, well, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. And this is just another twist on it. Oh, maybe I could have a referendum. Maybe I could have elections. Well, maybe I need a ceasefire first. And well, we're going to prepare for war in a few. I mean, how clear does it have to be? Oh, wait. Now we've got Larry Fink from BlackRock involved, along with Witkoff and Kushner. Oh yeah, that's really going to ring the Russians' bells. Oh, there's going to be money in it for us. Oh my goodness, we're all going to make money here. What is this? A New York real estate deal or something? I mean, it's absurd, Jamaro. And look, if there was any hope that anything useful was going to happen, it should have happened months and months ago, is that Trump would say to the Europeans and to the Kiev regime, which is not a real government and not a real state, that look, we're not going to support you anymore. It's the end. And honestly, I don't think he could do that. Even if he wanted to do that, I don't think he can do that. I don't think he knows how to do that. And so, we're going to go through this again. And Trump's going to find himself getting mad now at both sides. And, Putin is really disappointing me, and Zelensky's really disappointing me. I just think this is just another wrinkle on the same old tired script we've seen so many times before. And believe it or not, we still have people saying, "Oh, peace is this close. Yeah, they've almost got a deal. It's gonna happen." I think it's just absurd. I really do.
Why can't Trump do that? Why can't Trump walk? Why can't Trump call it quits? Why can't Trump call Zelensky and say, "Hey, man, you ran a good race.
Yeah,
time for you to go to the showers"? Why? What is the hedge in him doing something like that? Clearly, he has power to do
it. Does he really? Does he have the power to do it? That's the one thing we have to ask. I mean, let's suppose Trump were the different kind of personality that he is, a man who can make a decision, stick by it, and make sure it's carried out. I mean, right there, we're talking about a different human being, aren't we? What he would have to do is be able to impose on the huge bureaucracy of the federal government, the national security apparatus, a decision and make sure it sticks. Now, how's he going to do that? Because he doesn't even know how it works, much less how the people, the lieutenants that will make his decision stick, go down into the bureaucracy and dozens of agencies, hundreds of personnel who are all doing their little thing, and say, stop it. And here's how I'm ordering you to stop it. He doesn't know how to do that. And certainly Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio aren't going to make it happen. Radcliffe over the CIA is not going to make it happen. So he doesn't even know how to do that. But it also would mean he'd have to have the kind of personality that could make a decision, stick to it, not listen to the, whether it's General Keith Cornflake, Kellogg, whatever it is, or whoever it is, the next guy who's going to change his mind, or Marco Rubio. He'll send his little fixers over there to talk real estate deals, or we're going to have an oil bonanza in the Arctic and all that. And they're going to come back and spin all sorts of tall tales and thinking that the Russians are as motivated by deals as he is and his family. And I just don't think either he has the knowledge or the personnel or the personality to make it happen. And we've seen this many times before. Remember his first term, supposedly he'd given orders on several occasions to pull us out of Syria and pull us out of Afghanistan, and it just didn't happen because he doesn't know how to make it happen. So even if he has the right impulse at the right time, which he does sometimes, and sometimes it seems not, he can't deliver, in my opinion.
No, I totally understand. I mean, that from your point of view, though, this is going to have to be settled on the battlefield, not through some level of negotiation.
I think that's true with one caveat, and I think that is that there are still a lot of people in the Russian establishment who would like to see a deal, who think a deal is better than winning it on the battlefield and then let the diplomacy catch up with it. I mean, look, people say, well, a deal's much better. If everybody agrees, that'll be more stable than if the Russians just win on the battlefield. Well, not really. The Russians won on the battlefield when they entered Berlin in 1945. The diplomacy caught up afterward. I mean, you don't have to, once you create facts on the ground, the diplomacy eventually will ratify that fact. On the other hand, if you sign a deal expecting the other side to carry out the terms of the deal, and based on past experience, the West will not carry out the terms of the deal, how stable is that deal? And I think Putin's natural tendencies, which he's exhibited over and over again, is to trust in a deal. I mean, you even have smart guys like Alistair Crook saying the Russians want a legally binding treaty. What good is a legally binding treaty to the West? I mean, I can remember after that we talked about NATO expansion. Well, you should have got it in writing. We didn't agree to that in writing. Get it in writing next time. Well, 1244 resolution on Kosovo, they got it in writing. The West tore it up. The Minsk agreement was in writing. They tore it up. So even if the Russians get a legally binding treaty or Security Council resolution or a decision by the North Atlantic Council that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, who cares? They can change their mind tomorrow. The next president can change their mind tomorrow if they sign a legally binding treaty. So what good is that, I ask?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. From the European side, I mean, they seem to be doing any and everything in their power to effectively keep this going. And there's this kind of looming question of why, like, meaning they have to know what is taking place on the battlefield. Is it just our objective is to expand Russia? Is it we can't tolerate a humiliating defeat of NATO in this sense? Or is there something else going on in regards to the Europeans' point of view on this?
I think in a way it's kind of existential for the Europeans as it is for the Russians. I mean, not in the same sense that the Russians are trying to preserve their state and their national security. But I mean, and this is where I actually do throw a little bouquet to the Trump administration with a national security document they released recently, because even though the regional stuff is not that much of a departure from past policy, and I think a lot of people are reading into it stuff that's not there, the beginning of the document, supposedly drafted by Elbridge Colby, is actually some pretty good America First stuff, including, a vision for the United States, getting rid of DEI, reindustrialization, controlling our borders, all that kind of stuff. Okay, great. Well, who are the European leaders? They're a bunch of grifters. They're a bunch of American puppets, not American like Trump puppets, but maybe more like Joe Biden clones or something like that, who basically hate their own nations, hate their own history, hate their own people, and are there running this big grift through this sort of Manichaean lens that the Russians, not only the Russians, but the Hungarians and the Slovaks and other people in the East are the embodiment of everything they hate and are terrified will arise in their own population, that their own population will start saying, no, we need to put England first, France first, Germany first. And I really think that, that kind of a vision that Trump outlined, or whoever wrote the thing, the national security strategy, is pointing out that these are the kind of leaders they are, and they just need to keep that grift going. I mean, they're all going to retire rich, and they're going to keep it going. Après nous le déluge, after us the flood. We don't care what happens after that. We don't care what happens to Ukraine. We don't even care if there's a war with Russia, because maybe we'll go somewhere else. We'll go, find a nice beach somewhere in Costa Rica when everything blows up in their face. But for the time being, the only thing they can do is keep this thing going as long as they can. And as many Russians and Ukrainians die, what's that to them? They don't care.
or it seems that Russia is, let's say, taking a more your point of view more so on this, in the sense
Maybe.
of the idea for negotiations have been less prominent. Over and over again, we will accomplish the objective of the special military operation. Siversk has fallen, Volchansk has fallen, Pokrovsk has fallen, Leningrad is surrounded. At some point, Kramatorsk is going to be the only thing left standing, in which case there will be that is going to be the last line in the context of Donbass. Zaporozhye seems to be collapsing in regards to their front.
Yep.
Every day, Russia's taking more and more territory in this region. So, meaning they are accomplishing their objectives on the ground militarily, while this kind of clown show is taking place in Europe and the United States, where they're talking to themselves. Do you think somebody in Russia is listening to your take on this? Effectively saying, look, we can't trust anything coming out of the United States and Europe. And for all intents and purposes, facts on the ground will dictate terms. I know you make the argument that Putin has, let's say, a penchant for wanting a deal.
Yeah.
But that seems to be deprioritized more and more as this goes on.
I think so. And I think there is a division in the Russian leadership. And let's not forget that in Moscow and Petersburg, you have a lot of influential people who are just basically Western liberals, and they would love to go back to the way things were before. They would be more than thrilled to be part of the whole Western, global American empire gay thing if they could get away with it. But they're opposed increasingly by the Siloviki, the power ministries that were sort of put on the back shelf and now are more on the front shelf. And the fact that a lot of Russians, they didn't want to see all this blood and treasure expended for another lousy deal like a Minsk III, which is all the West is ever going to offer to the Russians. I don't know if the Russians have figured that out yet or not. Because look, I just got contacted by a couple of different Russian TV networks, and they're high on hopium again. Oh, does it look like there'll be another peace deal? I mean, of course these are journalists, so who knows what they think, So I think that temptation is always there, but I think it's one of the things where they would love to sell out. At least some of these people would love to sell out for another lousy deal if even a minimally lousy deal were offered to them. But it's not really being offered to them. So they may have no choice but to do what I would consider the right thing from the point of view of their national interest. But it still begs the question, what is their end game? Is it still their demands, 4 oblasts and Crimea and some pledges of denazification, demilitarization? Or do they understand the only way you're going to get denazification and demilitarization is the destruction of the Ukrainian state, Russian tanks in Kiev, and Russia taking everything up until the far west, Lvov and all that they don't need, and either making it all part of Russia or creating what really is a puppet state controlled by the Russians. Do they understand that or not? I think some of them do and some of them don't. And I don't know what their end game is. To all appearances, as you talk about, they're moving forward, but it seems that their approach is more pedagogical. Okay, now will you meet our terms? Now will you meet our terms? And maybe they know nobody's ever going to meet their terms. But when the crack comes, and I think a lot of people have been expecting this, at some point when things unravel in Kiev, things completely collapse at the front. They're crumbling at the front, but they haven't collapsed. When that day comes, what's the aha moment where they say, okay, now all bets are off. We're going to do what we need to do. Or they're going to finally say, now will you agree to our terms and agree to something less than I would consider a stable, long-term solution that meets the root causes of the war if I were in their shoes? I don't know the answer to that.
I think I'm not in their minds, obviously, but I think what they're looking at is this kind of Rand Corporation document of this plan to overextend the Russians. And if you have to effectively take over the entirety of Ukraine and you have to, bring up 3 million men in order to do it, you fulfill the obligations of the Rand document at the destruction of Ukraine. From your point of view, that's just life. Meaning, there's no way out that box. The moment that the special military operation started, there was no way to stop this special military operation. It was always going to go to fruition because there was never a deal to be had at that point. There was no way to stop.
And I think that's the mistaken expectation they went into this conflict with. I don't agree, however, that it would be overextending Russia for them to, as I say, liquidate the Ukrainian state and take the whole thing. Because I think there are enough Ukrainians that are sick to death of this thing that you create a Ukrainian administration. You take somebody like, just to throw some names out there, former Prime Minister Azarov or somebody like Medvedchuk, say, okay, you're now the head of a new administration. All you Ukrainians who didn't want this, all you Ukrainians who know what the Western powers did to you, we're going to create a new regime in Kiev or somewhere else, and we're going to back it up. And look, I mean, back in 2014, when all the Maidan occurred, the Russians gave Yanukovych a backup guarantee. You do what you need to do. You clear all those people off the streets of Kiev. You use whatever force you need to use, and we'll give you everything you need to do it. He could have done it, but he didn't want to. He thought he could finesse his way out of it. You get somebody in there who, if you will, be another Lukashenko, like in Belarus, and say, yeah, I'll do whatever I need to do to maintain order here, and it will be done by Ukrainians. The Russians will back us up, but it will be done by Ukrainians. I think that would be very, very possible.
Yeah, basically, there's a way around it without necessarily
overextending
the
Russian flag. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think so.
There is a conversation apparently in the Washington Post where the West is once again talking to itself about security guarantees.
Right.
This seems like a non-starter. Like it seems like a pathway to a third world war. But give me your take on this. I mean, are there security guarantees that would be accepted by the Russians?
I can't see any. It gets back to the basic question that we've been discussing. Do they want to try to, split the baby here and come up with a deal to give the other side a face-saving way out? Oh, well, yeah, we'll accept that you have some role in Ukraine's future security. Or do they say, "Niet, this has nothing to do with you anymore. This is now within our security zone. We will provide the security guarantees to whatever is left of Ukraine or whatever new Ukrainian state is created. End of discussion. We don't need you guys." I mean, this is where it gets back again to the national security document. You have so many people, again, I think high on hopium, who say that, oh, the Americans are walking away from Europe. We're doing no such thing. We would like to change the regimes in European countries, but we still want them to increase their defense spending to 5% of GDP. We still want to build up Europe as a military force. They say, well, to provide for their own defense. Defense against who? Well, obviously the Russians. Obviously, we will still want them to be a big anti-Russian force in Europe that we'll sell weapons to. We'll make a lot of money there too. So I don't see any prospect that this adversarial Western attitude toward Russia is going to change anytime soon. And if you have that kind of adversarial mindset in the West, how can the Russians accept a Western security guarantee in Ukraine under any circumstances if they have their head screwed on straight, which maybe they do and maybe they don't?
What do you make of the corruption bureau, Nabu Sapo, effectively going after all of these creatures, this corruption that they apparently just found a few weeks ago? It's like, hey, there's gambling.
What?
It's like they're shocked by the whole thing, right? It's like, oh my God, who knew there was gambling here?
Well, they got an email from a Nigerian prince in Kiev asking him to invest in a scheme. Wait. Nabu, isn't that the planet in Star Wars where the Ewoks live? I think it's
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I guess the funny thing to me about this is like they're acting mainstream media with all the sincerity in the world.
Yeah.
It's like we've just now 2 weeks ago uncovered corruption in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And it's only $100 million.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, get out of here, guys. It's like, are you being serious right now? Hundreds of billions of dollars has been shuffled through Ukraine, and they're like, it's only $100 million. What do you make of this? Obviously, the United States is exerting pressure in this case. What is the idea? Getting rid of Zelensky? His time is up.
Yeah, we could draw a leaf from our South Vietnam experience and put Zelensky on the per diem plan, if you catch my drift. That's one way to get rid of him. The other way, all this, a lot of people are saying his days are numbered. I don't know that. I think it really depends on whether MI6 wants to get rid of their client puppet there and put somebody in like Zaluzhny from, bring him in from London, which, instead of having a Jewish actor pretending to be a Ukrainian Nazi, you can have a real Ukrainian Nazi. That'll be a big improvement, It's okay. So I think you're right. I think that's partly the West, and namely the Americans, trying to put some pressure on Kiev to say, look, there's a really good deal on the table. Why won't you accept it? Here, we'll turn up the heat on you. But I think it's also some of the infighting in Kiev that I think the regime is visibly starting to crumble. I don't know how fast it will crumble, but I think this is also internal infighting, various corrupt politicians accusing each other of corruption. Because it's a political weapon for their internal disputes as well. So, like you say, everybody's always known. I think various characters, both external and internal, are trying to turn up the heat on one another. But I don't know that actually amounts to anything until there's, again, a real crack in the regime and it collapses. I don't know how close we are to that, really.
What happens when that crack takes place?
I don't know. Same thing with when the crack takes place on the front. I don't know. And that all gets back to Moscow. It really depends on what they want to do and how much they want to, frankly, fool themselves into thinking somebody is going to actually make a real deal with them. And I, like we said earlier, I don't know the answer to that question.
They do seem to want a deal. I always make this argument that Moscow is chasing safety. That from their point of view, they don't want to take West Ukraine. All things being equal, they want this to be over with. But I would imagine there are factions in Russia, as you point out, that we're not in the business of another Minsk, one or two. We're not in the business of another Istanbul. Meaning, is there a pressure that's being applied to Putin? I mean, there's been a lot of criticism also in Russia on Putin's, let's say, slow, methodical, continued negotiation stance. Will that pressure affect how he ultimately handles any kind of resolution to this conflict?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, again, it needs to be said one more time. Putin is not a dictator. He's not Stalin. He cannot just say, I want to do this, I want to do that. He's got a balance between factions there. And we don't know how powerful some of these factions are. Some people say he's really a puppet of the Chabad organization. He's a Jewish puppet, just like Trump is. Look, I don't know what to make of all that. I think a lot of people miss the discussion though about the regions of Ukraine. They think of the east, the south and the east, for everything from Odessa to Kharkov, and say, okay, that's essentially Russian. And then you've got the west. And when I talk about the West, I mean the far, far West. I mean like Uzhgorod and Lvov, these areas that were part of the Austrian Empire before 1914 and part of Poland before 1939. That's the far, far West. And the Russians have made it clear they don't want that. But everything east of that, including all of the Ukraine from Kiev all the way over to the far west, Zhytomyr, places like this that are Ukrainian-speaking areas that were in the Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, they're not as virulently anti-Russian as the places in the far west are. And I think those are eminently, if you will, annexable by Russia, or at least the basis of a Ukrainian state that would not be a problem for the Russians. So when we say the West, I think that quote West is in a very different category from the far, far West. And I'm sure the Russians understand this. But on the other hand, we don't even, people say, well, once Pokrovsk falls, it's off to the Dnieper River. Well, really? I mean, they've shown, they're still creeping into Kharkov. They're still creeping, as you said, in Zaporozhye. There's talk that they're moving into the direction of Odessa. But my sense is they would rather not do that. I think that's a mistake. I think they should do that. I think if this war ends with anything less than everything from Odessa to Kharkov, it is objectively a defeat for Russia and an invitation to the next war, which will be even more devastating and maybe total uncontrolled war that we could all, kiss various body parts goodbye.
Is this document, the National Security Strategy by Trump, assuming it's even actionable, is it a break in the U.S. European association or connection, or do you see it that way? I mean, he obviously, his contempt for Europe is breathtaking in this document.
I don't see it that way at all. I don't see it. I see a lot of people saying, well, it's this document shows the Americans are walking away from Europe. I don't see that at all. Remember, to walk away from Europe means that we have to renounce Europe as a sphere of American influence. And there's nothing in the document. A lot of people say, well, this is a multi what is it?
Multipolar world. That's what they
now.
say. Like there's like, oh, this is multipolar
influence and all that, because we're doubling down in the Western Hemisphere and enhance the Monroe Doctrine. We got to go kill Venezuelans or whoever. No, certainly we are reconsolidating in a very stupid way, in my opinion, our dominance in the Western Hemisphere. But you notice there's not a syllable in there indicating that we're going to grant recognize spheres of influence of other powers, the Russians, the Chinese, and so forth. Like with China, they talk about, well, first island chain, South China Sea, and all that. Like we still have to be the regional hegemon there, even though it's right on China's shore. In terms of Europe, people say, well, the European section says we're going to reach an accommodation with the Russians. It doesn't say that. It just says we want a stable relationship between Europe and Russia. What does that mean exactly? What I think we're seeing here is kind of like what happened, and I've always compared Trump to kind of an American Gorbachev, who will produce similar results, by the way, in my opinion. That just as the Soviets got rid of all the little Brezhnevs in Eastern Europe and installed little Gorbachev reform communists, I think what Trump would like to do, or whoever wrote that document, is get rid of all the little Joe Bidens in Europe and install little Trumps, instead of having all these globalist, like I described earlier, anti-national, anti-historical, self-hating globalist leaders who are U.S. puppets. We want to have pro-American, little Viktor Orbáns all over the continent. A French Orbán, maybe Marine Le Pen, or maybe somebody like Nigel Farage in London, and so on and so forth, which in my opinion would be an improvement. But it hardly means America walking away from the continent. It means we'd have more reliable leaders that we could count on to actually mobilize their populations against Russia and be a real force against Russia compared to these idiots that they have there now. So I think that's the real thrust of the document if you read the document carefully. If you separate the rhetoric in the first part from the regional outline of policy that you find in the latter part of the document, which is one reason why the document is so incoherent.
One last question. Venezuela.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on with this? Like it seems outrageous. He's just murdering people in the Caribbean. They just stole the oil tanker.
Yeah.
And, I think it's like 20-30% of U.S. military hardware in regards to the Navy is sitting in the Caribbean right now. And yet he hasn't pulled the trigger on using that hardware. It seems like there's some quibble within the administration on doing this. I mean, I think I've made the argument, and other people made the argument, Trump has fallen into a trap of his own making on this because there's no win in this. But give me your take. What do you think is going on?
Well, there could be a win. I mean, there were reports that Maduro had offered Trump essentially, the sun, moon, and the stars. That you want to come in, have your companies come in, help us exploit Venezuelan energy resources and all that. We're open to that, and I think he could have taken a win, and I think would have been a rather substantial win. I don't think it was a necessary win for the United States, but if it means we're going to get dealt in to whatever the resource issues are in Venezuela, I think that would have been something where he can say, hey, I just solved my 18th war or whatever it is. I don't think he's willing to take that offer. And again, I don't know who is, everybody's saying, and I assume it's true, that Marco Rubio is the guy who's taking the lead on this. And he is bound and determined no deal. Even if they bare their throat and offer us everything, that's not good enough. He's got to go, and we have to have regime change, and we need to dictate who rules in Caracas. And I think, unfortunately, you're like you said, he's painted himself into that corner. With anything less than that now is a defeat for him. So we've gone, from murder on the high seas to piracy on the high seas, and I don't know what their next move is going to be. And somebody has compared our buildup in the region to pulling back on a bowstring. You can only stand there for so long doing that before you either release it or you shoot the arrow. And I think the indications are growing that we're going to shoot the arrow. And it looks also like the Russians and the Chinese are doubling down on their pledges of support to Maduro. And, and maybe there's a temptation for them to say, oh, well, you wanted to bleed, the Russians say, you wanted to bleed us white in Ukraine. Well, maybe we'll bleed you white in Venezuela when you go in.
We'll do the same. Yeah.
Maybe Venezuela turns into our Ukraine, and maybe it works out better for the Russians there than it did work out for us in Ukraine.
Do you think he'd be crazy enough to put in U.S. troops?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that
I mean,
is.
one scenario I've heard, what makes a lot of sense, actually, if anything makes sense here, is that they do sort of what the Soviets did in Afghanistan. You have a coup in the capital and a new government installed, and then they invite you in to fight the rebels. So it's possible we have assets in Caracas. They stage a coup, overthrow the government, claim to be the new government of Venezuela, invite American allies in to suppress the remnants of the old regime that are still loyal to Maduro's regime. So maybe that's the scenario. I don't know.
Jim, great breakdown. Always a great breakdown. Always appreciate you, man. Jim Jatras. He's a former U.S. diplomat, policy advisor, and analyst for the Republican leadership in the U.S. Senate. Jim, you have my appreciation and thanks, man. Thank you for this. Be safe, okay?